This is a short video lecture pertaining to sustaining biodiversity and saving ecosystems. The key terms from this chapter are listed on the screen in front of you. I've highlighted some in blue that will be important for you to know. This chapter focuses on forests and the ecological services provided by forests. Forests are categorized based on their age and structure. Old-growth forests are uncut, regenerated forests not seriously disturbed by human activity or natural disasters for over 200 years. Second-growth forests are forests that have resulted from secondary ecological succession after the primary forests have been destroyed, maybe from a volcanic eruption or from a forest fire. You have second-growth forests resulting from those, or people coming and cutting down all the trees. Tree plantations are managed tree farms growing only one or two types of species of trees. Commercial tree farms can be beneficial if managed carefully. Their rapid growth can supply most of the wood needed for industrial purposes. This also protects the world's remaining old-growth and second-growth forests from being cleared. The downside to this is that these forests typically contain 1 to 2 species, and they violate the natural laws of biodiversity principle and sustainability. By having only 2 species of trees over a large area, it doesn't provide the ecosystem to sustain more biodiversity like a normal forest would with over 15 to 20 different species of trees. Almost half of the world's forests have actually been cut down. It's estimated that 46% of the world's forests have been cut down. Most of this has happened since 1950. So deforestation is defined as the temporary or permanent removal of large expanses of forest in exchange for agriculture, human settlement, or other uses. If the current deforestation rates continue, about 40% of the world's remaining intact forests will have been logged or converted to other uses within 20 years, if not sooner. Clearing large area forest, especially old-growth forest, has important short-term economic benefits, but it also has a number of harmful environmental impacts, which carry on for a longer time frame. The maps at the bottom of the page depict what the estimated forest cover was in 1620 of virgin forests, and in 1998 of what's remaining. So we only have small, isolated areas with original old-growth forests occurring in the United States, including right here near the Tennessee area, the Smoky Mountain National Park, and then up in the New York State where the Adirondack Mountains are located, as well as some over in the western part of the United States. So the picture on the left is of an old-growth forest, and again, these have been around for over 200 years, and you're going to see large diameter trees in these forests with good canopy cover. The bottom right picture is a tree plantation, which only has 1 species of tree planted over a large geographic area. So looking at these 2 pictures, you can tell there's a lack of biodiversity here on the right in the tree plantation as compared to the biodiversity here on the left with the old-growth forest. On the screen in front of you is a list of ecological services and economic services provided by forests. Economic services are somewhat common sense: fuel wood, lumber, pulp to make paper. Much of our mining occurs in forested regions, converting them to livestock grazing, recreation, and there's jobs associated with forests. Ecosystem services range from geochemical cycling of nutrients, reducing soil erosion during rainfall events, absorbing and releasing water from rainfall events, purifying the water as the water flows through the forest into the streams, purifying the air, having local influence and regional influence on climate, being a sink for absorbing carbon, and providing numerous wildlife habitats. There are different methods to harvest trees from forest. This first one is a diagram depicting selective cutting. This technique cuts intermediate aged or mature trees, either singly or in small groups. The picture in the bottom left corner is of clear cutting, and this is when all trees are removed from a geographic area, regardless of age. This is the most efficient approach and the least costly, but it causes major harm to the ecosystem. In the top right corner is strip cutting, and it's where trees are removed in sections parallel to the feature, maybe parallel to the road or parallel to a topographic boundary. And what they do is they do it in strips where 1 year ago this area was cut, 3 to 10 years ago this area was cut, but it's regrowing, and then you have an uncut area. And this is just another diagram of strip cutting, how it shows varied age tree sections based on when that area was cut. So between 2000 and 2007, the net forest area in the United States actually stabilized or increased. Most of the increase was due to tree plantations. We still have experienced a net terrestrial biodiversity loss as a result of this, though. Even though we have similar amount of trees, biodiversity has decreased because most of this tree area is tree plantations. So, as far as the U.S. forests are concerned, they cover about 30% of the land area in the United States and contain 80% of our wildlife species and supply 67% of our nation's water for surface water supply. The forest cover now is greater than it was in 1920, but most of the forest cover is secondary succession scenarios, and it could be, third or fourth growth of trees, not original growth trees or old growth forests that are over 200 years old. The picture on your right has a very straight boundary between an area that was clear cut and an area that's forested. And I often ask my students, what do you think caused this boundary to exist right here? Sometimes they say, well, maybe this is a national park, and they clear cut right up to the edge. Maybe this is a nature preserve or a national forest, and they clear cut right up to the edge. Or perhaps this is two different states. This might be Idaho, and this might be Wyoming, and maybe they allow clear cutting in Wyoming. So there's definitely a distinct boundary here, marking out the clear cut area from the uncut area. And please take notice to the amount of roads that they have to build throughout the area in order to access the region for cutting the trees down. In addition, think about when it rains in this area. Over here when it rains, the forest canopy and the trees and the plants in this region are going to absorb that rainwater and slowly allow it to filtrate down into the stream valley here. On this side of the picture, when it rains, there's nothing to capture that rainwater, and it's going to instantly run across the land surface, causing erosion, and then into the stream valley, where it ends up having a lot of sediment going into the stream and causing water quality problems. So let's shift to tropical rainforests. Tropical rainforests are definitely disappearing rapidly. Tropical forests cover about 6% of the Earth's land area. And it's known that half the world's known species of terrestrial plants and animals live in these forests. Brazil actually has more than 30% of the world's remaining tropical forests in its vast Amazon basin. At the current rate of global deforestation, about 50% of the world's remaining old-growth tropical forests will be gone or severely degraded by the end of this century. Causes of tropical deforestation are varied and complex. It can result from a number of interconnected underlying and direct causes. Obviously, pressures from population growth and poverty push subsistence farmers and the landless poor into the tropical forests where they try to grow enough food to survive. There's also government subsidies that can accelerate the direct causes such as logging and ranching by reducing the cost of timber harvest and cattle grazing. They also foster the creation of vast plantations of crops such as soybeans. So tropical forests in the Amazon and other South American countries are cleared or burned mostly for cattle grazing and large soybean plantations. In Indonesia, Malaysia, and other areas in Southeast Asia, the tropical rainforests are being replaced with vast plantations of oil palm, whose oil is used in cooking, cosmetics, and biodiesel fuel for motor vehicles, especially in Europe. In Africa, people struggle to survive by clearing plots of forest for small-scale farming and by harvesting wood for fuel, which also contributes to deforestation on that continent. So this graphic depicts the causes of deforestation in the Amazon and Brazil for the years specified. It appears that cattle ranching is the primary cause, up to 70%. Logging is for 2 to 3%, and then there's a large-scale agriculture contribution between 5 to 10%. So these are the main causes of the deforestation in the Amazon. With cattle ranching, the price of beef almost doubles in Brazilian currency when they export the beef to US, Europe, and China. This graphic is depicting annual forest loss in Brazil and Indonesia between 2000 and 2012. The red bars indicate forest loss for Indonesia, and the green bars indicate forest loss for Brazil over the time frame. Around 1968, the Brazilian government began road building in central Brazil, which led to the Trans-Amazon Highway. This is a highway that was supposed to be over 5,000 miles long, but because Brazil hit a financial crisis in 1970, the highway only reached about 2,400 miles. Many roads were constructed illegally. This highway went through many villages of indigenous tribes living in the Amazon, who never had much contact with other people but themselves. It actually led to disease, which killed hundreds of natives, and many natives were forced to relocate. So the natives actually moved further out into the forest, which then allowed more industries to come into the forest with ease along the roads that were already built. In other words, there was nobody to fight off. That being said, a highway that had been partially built caused an indirect contribution to deforestation, which, in the 1970s, many farmers and ranchers and loggers took advantage of this highway to fund their own means by which they were illegally harvesting and transporting timber. Ranching began unprofitable in the same location because of poor soil conditions, so they would find another patch of land and use the slash and burn method to remove all the trees and start raising cattle again. This method was unsustainable, and the cycle would repeat until about 1990. In 1990, where ranching grew because exports to Europe were paying such high prices on beef, raising cattle began to clear more land and employ more people. At this time, there were not many restraints, so that farmers would double the size of their cattle, which would continue to cause deforestation. Since this was creating more jobs, the Brazilian government and economists saw this as an investment, since Brazilian beef was very competitive on a global scale. Brazil was almost giving land away of the Amazon to encourage the poor to grab a stake of about 125 acres, which by 1995 was about 48% of the deforestation was caused by farmers. Keep in mind, this does not count to the total amount of illegal farming that was going on as well. So in 2000, many rules and regulations were implemented by organizations such as CITES, that's the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species, Greenpeace, and the World Wildlife Federation. They were raising money to help preserve the Amazon. As you can see from the graphic, between 2000 to 2005, there was a huge incline in deforestation, even though many organizations tried to prevent this. But the problem was with the Brazilian government. They lacked the funds and the criminal justice system and the technology to be able to track down those who were committing illegal acts of deforestation. And in 2004, Brazil established more than 70,000 square miles of parks, nature preserves, and national forests in the Amazon to make up for this loss. So the best way to continue moving forward with our forests is to manage them sustainably. Identify and protect areas that are high in biodiversity, rely more on selective cutting and strip cutting, not doing clear cutting, don't log any old-growth forests, limit the amount of road building in uncut forests, leave most standing dead trees and fallen timber for wildlife habitat and nutrient cycling, plant tree plantations primarily on deforested and degraded land without taking fresh forested land, and do certifying of timber that's grown on by sustainable methods. So there's definitely approaches that we can take to improve the way in which we harvest trees from our forests.